Why do your favorite hobbies suddenly feel meaningless after awakening? The passions that once defined you, the things that made life exciting, start to lose their flavor, and it feels confusing, even scary, like part of you has died. Carl Jung warned that awakening isn't all bliss and love. It's also a dismantling, and one of the first signs is losing interest in the things that once gave you joy, not because you're lazy or broken, but because something deeper is happening in your psyche. This is a common but misunderstood experience. You're not crazy and you're not alone. Jung psychology explains exactly why this happens. And by the end of this video, you'll not only understand why your old hobbies feel meaningless, you'll see how this emptiness is actually a sign of growth. So stay with me, because what feels like a loss is actually the beginning of a more authentic life. Before awakening, hobbies usually serve the ego and often function as identity markers. The gamer, the artist, the musician, the athlete. Your hobby becomes part of the mask you wear, the persona, as Jung called it. Think about it. Hobbies give you achievement, status, or a sense of belonging. They can be ways to distract yourself from stress or to prove your worth to others. That's why they feel so exciting in the ego phase, because they reinforce your sense of me. But awakening cracks that mask. Suddenly the old motivation doesn't work anymore. Winning a game, posting or painting on social media, or even writing a song doesn't feel as fulfilling, because the part of you that cared so much, the ego identity, has started dissolving. That loss of motivation isn't a mistake. It's a sign that your psyche is shifting. What once fueled your ego no longer feeds your soul. So if the ego-driven hobbies no longer hold meaning, what comes next? This is where Jung's insight gets fascinating. He said awakening is a confrontation with the self, the deeper core of who you are, and when that self begins to surface, it reorders everything. This is why your old values start to collapse. Goals that once made sense, winning, achieving, collecting, competing, suddenly feel like chasing smoke, because your psyche has shifted its focus from persona to the self. Before awakening, your pleasures were tied to external rewards, getting recognition, feeling productive, and stacking achievements. All of that was tied to the outer world. But when awakening cracks you open to a larger reality, maybe through breathwork, psychedelics, deep inner work, or sheer life experience, the outer world just doesn't shine the same way anymore. The hobbies that once brought you excitement can suddenly feel stripped of their magic, because many of those hobbies were tied to proving something to yourself, to others, to the world. Painting wasn't just painting. It was a way to feel talented. Gaming wasn't just fun. It was a way to feel accomplished. Shopping wasn't just shopping. It was a way to feel worthy, stylish, or enough. But after awakening, when the mask persona begins to fall, you realize you don't have to prove anything anymore. The drive to seek validation through hobbies collapses. What once felt like nourishment now feels like performance. In a moment, you no longer need to be seen as a gamer, the artist, or the achiever. The fuel behind those activities evaporates. This isn't loss, it's liberation. It means your soul is no longer content with chasing recognition or building identity through hobbies. Instead, it's turning inward, searching for meaning beyond performance. The reason this feels so disorienting is because hobbies were never just hobbies. They were part of your story. They told you who you were. But when awakening confronts you with the self, it dissolves those old labels. That's why you might feel lost. Like you don't know yourself anymore. The old map is gone, but the new one hasn't been drawn yet. And in that space, everything feels pointless. Here's the important part. Jung didn't see this as the end of joy. He saw it as the stripping away of illusions to make room for something deeper. Your old value systems collapse because they were built on persona and conditioning. What comes next, though, it takes time. Our soul-aligned passions, activities not born from ego, but from authenticity. And yes, there's a void in between, a silence, a strange nothingness, where things that once mattered now feel empty. But that void has a purpose. Here's the raw truth. Not all hobbies were hobbies. Some were escapes. Maybe you painted to avoid loneliness. Maybe you gamed to silence anxiety. Maybe you were singing because you felt unseen and unnoticed. On the surface, it looked like fun or passion. But underneath, many hobbies were unconscious strategies to soothe pain you didn't want to face. Carl Jung called this the shadow, those hidden wounds, fears, and emotions we bury because they don't fit the version of ourselves we want to believe in. And here's what awakening does. It pulls that shadow out of hiding. Suddenly the hobby you once relied on doesn't give the same relief, because it was never really about the hobby. It was about avoiding the feelings underneath. So when awakening happens, the psyche starts dismantling these distractions. It's like your soul saying no more band-aids face the wound. That's why you lose interest. Not because you're bored of your passions, but because the passions were serving as masks. When the mask falls, the coping mechanism fails. And that can feel brutal suddenly. You can't run from your shadow. You have to sit with it. This stage can feel depressing. Even hopeless people often say, I don't enjoy anything anymore. What's wrong with me? But Jungian psychology says nothing's wrong. In fact, this is a breakthrough. Because for the first time, you're meeting yourself without distraction. You're no longer hiding behind endless activity. You're seeing the loneliness, the fear, the grief, the longing, and while it hurts, it's also profoundly healing. By sitting with the shadow, instead of painting over it, you begin to integrate it. You learn that loneliness isn't a death sentence. It's a doorway to self-connection. Fear isn't a weakness, it's a signal to be honored. Grief isn't a curse, it's a teacher. Losing your old escapes feels like losing part of yourself, but really it's losing the veil. And here's where it gets even deeper. The stage of losing your hobbies, facing the void, and meeting your shadow isn't just a detour. It's part of what mystics call the dark night of the soul. The dark night is not about despair for despair's sake. It's about dismantling the illusions that once structured your life. Jung would say it's the collapse of the old psychic order. The things that gave you meaning, your hobbies, goals, pleasure suddenly fall apart. And at first it feels like a kind of death. You wake up one morning and the spark is gone. Music feels like noise, painting feels forced. Gaming feels like repetition. Shopping feels pointless. Even life itself seems stripped of color. But here's the secret. This death of meaning isn't an ending at all. It's a sacred transition. When the old self dissolves, the psyche enters a liminal space, caught between who you were and who you're becoming. The hobbies belong to the old you. They were tied to the persona, the mask, and when that mask falls, they no longer fit. That's why everything feels dead. It's not because life has no meaning. It's because the old meaning system has collapsed. You can't force yourself back into it. You can't reattach the mask. Jung compared this to alchemy. The psyche must undergo a nigredo, a blackening, a dissolving before anything new can be born. The dark night is the psychological nigredo, the burning away of what no longer serves, so that new gold can emerge. As painful as it feels, as void as a function, it strips away false motivations. It forces you to sit with silence, with emptiness, with nothing to prove and nothing to hide behind. It teaches you that you are not your hobbies. You're not your achievements. You're not the roles you played. When everything external loses meaning, you are invited to touch something deeper, the ground of being itself, the self as Jung would call it, not the ego self that needs validation, but the deeper self that simply is. And from that ground, new forms of meaning eventually sprout. But this time, they're not ego-driven, they're soul-driven. Jung called this process individuation, becoming your true self whole and undivided. Losing your old hobbies is not the end of creativity. It's the clearing of the field, so that authentic creativity can grow. Maybe painting comes back, not as a way to prove your talent, but as meditation. Maybe music returns, not to show off, but to express your soul. Maybe new passions appear, gardening, writing, walking in nature that you never expected. These aren't hobbies in the old sense. They're not escapes or expressions of your being. When individuation begins, your joy shifts from doing to achieve into doing to be. The activity itself becomes nourishment, not a mask. So what would Jung suggest? If you're here stuck in a void, grieving your lost passions, be patient with the void. Don't force old hobbies back into your life. Allow the emptiness. It's part of the process. Experiment with new expressions. Try journaling, walking in nature. Silence all forms of art you've never explored. Let the self guide you. Observe your shadow. Ask yourself, was this hobby feeding my soul or feeding my persona? That question alone can reframe everything. Trust the process of individuation. Something new will emerge, but only after you've let go of what no longer serves. If you're moving through this stage right now, remember you're not alone. Thousands of souls on this path are feeling the same emptiness, the same loss of meaning. So let's make this a conversation. What passion or hobby did you lose after your awakening? And what do you feel is trying to be born in its place? Drop in the comments. It could be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And if you want more guidance on shadow work, Jung psychology, and the mysteries of spiritual awakening, hit subscribe to Fractal Wisdom. Together we'll keep exploring the depths most people are too afraid to look at.